Let's do it.
Night school.
Night school.
So we're reading a crazy book, Cosmos
Yeah.
and Psyche, Richard Tarnas. I was interested whether there was an apologetics equivalent in astrology, because I'm really interested in that aspect of Christian academia, like rational arguments for Christian ideas.
Yeah.
So I was like, there's got to be something like that for astrology. Actually, I was assuming there wasn't, because I was like, nah, astrology's crazy. There's no
Right.
rational, whatever, it's stupid. But I was like, I'm going to try and give it a shot.
But if there is some truth to it, then there should be some apologetics out there. Somebody's proving it. If there is evidence, it's out there.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And if there is none, then I'm just going to just shrug and leave astrology alone.
Yeah, it
Like,
still
I'm
could
good.
hypothetically be true to some extent, but at that point, it's like, now I got to be the one to prove it. And
Right.
no thanks. No
Right.
thanks.
I really don't care.
Yeah.
I really don't care. But I was following this page on Instagram that I had stumbled into at a point where I was trying to revamp my news feed on Instagram. I was trying to make it more positive, more spiritual, more motivating and everything.
Mhm.
So I was looking up like keywords that I was interested in, following pages. So following some page called Celestial Fairy that was just posting like a ton of astrology things. So I messaged that page. It was a chick, and I asked her for that. I'm like, hey, I'm interested in apologetics for Christianity. Is there something like that for astrology? She sent me like 20 book links, right? I'm like, there's no way this girl read all these books. She's not telling me what any of them are about. So I'm like, I just start reading all the descriptions on all of them. This guy was said to be interested in Plato and Jung. So I was like, okay, Plato's the rational guy, and Jung is the mystic scientist. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, and it just popped out at me as soon as I saw it. Maybe just because it's a cover that looks quality
It's
and
a good
legitimate.
cover. Yeah.
You know, it looks professional, but it's a little trippy too.
Yeah.
And
It's
a lot
kind
of the
spacey kind of mythology.
yeah, it's got like some sort of Zeus figure, some sort of angel with a bow and arrow. I don't know what. That's probably some Greek goddess.
I think that's one of the signs. One of the signs is like an archer. I
Okay,
think.
yeah.
It's probably that.
It's got some planets on it, space in the background. That weird galaxy coloring stuff that just seems to be splashed on space in pictures.
Right.
Whatever the hell that stuff is.
Yeah.
Nebulas?
Yeah, nebulas. That's
Yeah,
it.
nebulas.
Yeah.
I don't know what a nebula
Although
is.
any sort of like cluster of colored things at a far enough back would just look like a fog, kind of.
Yeah.
So I don't think like a galaxy would just look like that too, if far enough away.
Yeah.
Anyway, colors in space. Good cover.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So maybe it popped out at me intuitively because I was like, yeah, this book's important
Mhm.
to my spiritual journey. I need to read this. Maybe it's just a good cover, but more a good description. But I was like, this is the book. I need to read this book. So I ordered it.
Yeah.
Then got it, read it. No, I hadn't even ordered it yet. I saw it on your Amazon wish list. I was
Right.
reading through your wish list because I was just book shopping and just curious about what you had been interested in.
Yeah.
Saw it on your wish list too, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm ordering it for sure.
Yeah.
So ordered it, started reading it. And why was it on your wish list?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I assume because I remember you reading my list, and I feel like when I look through my wish list, which I did after you were looking through it, like I recognized everything else on it except for this book, but there was like a period a few months ago where I was just there was like one day where I was interested in astrology and was like looking up some things about it, and I probably looked up something like Reddit best book on astrology. I do that a lot when I get like interested in some kind of topic. Like that's how I ended up at the book on ESP.
Oh, nice.
It was like Reddit best book on ESP, and then you can just read through a thread where people are talking about it and responding to each other. That always feels like a good way to actually find a solid book on a topic.
Nice.
So I must have done that. And then after you brought up to me that book, and you brought up that like somebody else had mentioned that book, I guess like the synchronicity of that made me more want to order it. And then like a week later, I ordered this and a couple other books.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you I had ordered it, and you told me you had already started reading it. So I didn't know that when I ordered it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow, that's legit.
So I was planning on doing it for the podcast.
Yeah.
But you had already started reading it. So we
This is
decided
the
we'll just both
first
do it.
time we've both read it.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes. It'll
Yeah.
be cool to see how we pick out different things. You already brought up a really interesting thing from the book, which was that, so the astrological worldview says that the positions of the stars will indicate events that happen on Earth. And
Right.
you brought up the point that doesn't necessarily mean that the movement of the stars cause events on Earth.
Right.
It could be thought of as though the stars in the sky are the clock that indicate events that are happening on Earth because they align with the events that are happening on Earth in the same way that the clock aligns with the time that it happens to be in the room.
Right.
Page 77, you're already there,
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I love that because I like that is a really interesting question, and he brought that up. There's like this section is called causality and correlation, and he's just discussing
Hmm.
like, okay, so what does this mean? If this is true, and there's stuff going on in the stars, alignments in the stars are lining up with what happens here, then what does that mean? Like, does that mean that we are making the star shapes, or are the stars telling us what? Like, are we just following orders and we don't even realize it because it's causing us to do what we do? And I loved this sort of answer to that. In the perspective I am suggesting here, reflecting the dominant trend in contemporary astrological theory, the planets do not cause specific events any more than the hands on a clock cause a specific time, which I think is really cool. The idea that it's
That's
like
awesome.
it just doesn't it's it's just they're both right. Like the clock is spinning and time is passing, but that doesn't mean that either thing is causing either thing. There's just this sort of relationship between those two things.
Yeah.
I love that. Love
Yeah.
that idea.
And that was one thing in the book that you picked out that when you mentioned it to me, I thought
Hmm.
I hadn't even read that yet. I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. I had already read through it, but I just skimmed over it, didn't notice it or remember it.
Right.
So far, I dig the idea of both of us reading it and then going through it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's cool.
yeah.
There was something else that was very similar to that idea of the idea of like the clock and it being like a relationship between the two things. Oh, here we go. Astrology rests on the cosmos as a coherent embodiment of creativity, intelligence, and meaning expressed through a constant correspondence between astronomy and human experience. So, astrology rests on the idea that what's happening here and what's happening up there are an expression all together. Like, the universe is all intelligent, it's all smart, and it's all working together. And what's happening in the stars is happening here in human experience. It's a dance between those two things.
Hmm.
It's not that one causes the other. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
We are in sync with it the same way we're in sync with clocks.
Yeah.
Love that.
I've done a decent amount of contemplation on the made in the image of God doctrine because
Mm,
I really don't like taking it as God being made in the image of man and thinking that God looks like a man. Like that's just never really resonated with me. And so I think about new ways to interpret that. And after reading this book, I'm interpreting that doctrine more like the same patterns that unfold in the human mind and maybe even in the human body also
yeah.
unfold in the universe itself because we are a product of the universe. That's how I take that doctrine, made in the image of God, just to say there is a constant creative intelligence that flows through you and flows through the whole universe,
Hmm.
and you're a part of it. And so you act like the universe because you're a product of the universe.
Right, right. We're in it, we're participating with it. Well, I guess that kind of leads into the idea of like there's a big section of the book early on that discusses like Western thought and the
Mm-hmm.
evolution of Western thought and how we've gotten to where we are now and like the two different ways of like communicating with the world or of interacting with the world and where we are now. And I have a note here for I wrote down the two paradigms. Oh wait, this isn't. Yeah, this is close enough to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the first paradigm, familiar to all of us from our education, describes human history and the evolution of human consciousness as an epic narrative of human progress, a long heroic journey from a primitive world of dark ignorance, suffering, and limitation to a brighter world of ever increasing knowledge, freedom, and well-being. And then, wait, what's the second one though? Well, the second one is the shadow of that, and it's the notion that
Right.
we have been falling. At some point, we started falling away from unity, and we're falling away. And
Right.
those are two different like stories that people tell about the world, and that we're getting more and more advanced, and we're like moving towards some sort of ascension or something, and there's just as much evidence that like we're moving, like we were at a good place before, and now we're slipping and we're falling farther and farther. And those two things are both kind of happening because of the way uh, that we're interacting with the world. Because well, he talks a lot about the idea of primal experience and the modern experience.
Yeah.
And the primal experience is very Jung, and it's very like the world all has meaning. What we're interacting with is full of meaning, and we're a part of it. And if you can see the meaning in it, you can commune with this world and be a part of it and work towards the same goals that it's working towards. And sort of the modern experience, which is where Western thought is kind of leading us, the modern experience is more that the world is meaningless and the world is mechanistic, and we can figure out how to use it better and better for our own advancement, and that we're the only thing that's like creative or above the rest of what's going on. The rest
Right.
of what's going on is dead, and it's
Yeah.
just for us
It's
to
just
use.
stuff.
Yeah, all stuff.
Yeah. So we talked at one point about presenting two books together, one of them being Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, and one of them being, what's it called? His
Industrial society and its consequences, or something like that.
something like that,
Yeah.
by the Unabomber, Ted
Yeah.
Kaczynski.
AKA
So
Unabomber Manifesto.
Unabomber Manifesto, yeah,
Yeah.
which is like a 30, 40-page document where a domestic
Yeah.
terrorist explains everything that's bad about Western progress and all the ways in which we become isolated from what's meaningful by becoming obsessed with and enslaved to technology.
Right.
And then in Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, he's saying Western thought and prosperity has resulted in the entire world gradually being lifted out of poverty, suffering, and disease.
Yeah.
And those two narratives that they have are kind of similar to the two narratives that Richard Tarnas is describing here. He's saying, on one hand, the Western mind has become so obsessed with categorizing everything as stuff and thinking scientifically and gaining power and dominion over the natural world that they're disconnected from being itself, and they're confused and dead and darkened
Right.
inside.
Right.
And on the other hand, we seem to be gaining a mastery over nature that means we are climbing in the direction of absolute reality or God or whatever it is.
Right. And both of those things can be true.
Seems like it.
Seems to me that they both seem to be true.
Yeah.
But I guess that could be one of those things where like we'll see. We'll see which thing happens in the end.
Right.
Or maybe we won't. Maybe
I like to
both
think
things-
that they both are true. That
Probably.
that the universe is decaying and the universe is evolving. They're both true.
Yeah.
And that's not intuitive. And by intuitive, I mean like easy to grasp or rational on its surface to a Western mind like mine. But I do think that it's the case. Like, it doesn't make sense to me, but it makes more sense to me than assuming it's one or the other. No,
Right.
we're decaying. It's all screwed.
Right.
Or no, we're evolving. This is great. Going in a great direction. No cause for concern.
Right.
Just neither of those feel right. So it's like, all right, I'll just try to believe both, even though I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, he says something about like you need to be open to that paradox. I have this section that's about these two different things that I wanted to read here. One is reminded here of Niels Bohr's axiom in quantum physics: the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. Or Oscar Wilde's "a truth in art is that whose contradictory is also true." What is difficult, of course, is to see both images, both truths, simultaneously, to suppress nothing, to remain open to the paradox, to maintain the tension of opposites. Wisdom, like compassion, often seems to require of us that we hold multiple realities in our consciousness at once. This may be the task we must begin to engage if we wish to gain a deeper understanding of the evolution of human consciousness and the history of the Western mind in particular, to see that long intellectual and spiritual journey moving through stages of increasing differentiation and complexity as having brought about both a progressive ascent to autonomy and a tragic fall from unity, and perhaps as having prepared the way for a synthesis on a new level. From this perspective, the two paradigms reflect opposite but equally essential aspects of an immense dialectical process, an evolutionary drama that has been unfolding for thousands of years, and that now appears to be reaching a critical, perhaps climactic moment of transformation.
I really like the comparison between wisdom and compassion. It's saying that in order to be wise, you have to hold multiple perspectives at once that
Hmm.
could seemingly contradict. And to be compassionate, you have to be able to adopt the perspective of another person temporarily and
Yeah,
consider their point of view so that you can feel like if I can't be compassionate with somebody, it's because I can't conceive what it's like to be them.
right.
So I can't understand what it would possibly be like to be them. But if I can maintain my perspective and then adopt theirs long enough to have compassion for them, then I've done something psychologically contradictory or split. You know what I mean?
Because you can understand their point of view long enough to accommodate it to better support yours. Is that what you're saying?
No, I can understand their point of view in so to have compassion for somebody, you have to be able to imagine yourself in their shoes.
Sure.
The fact that you can imagine yourself in their shoes and yours means that you've adopted two perspectives.
Hmm.
Then so he's saying to be wise, you have to adopt multiple perspectives, and to be compassionate, you have to adopt multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
I like that comparison.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I often think about like when I think about forgiveness, I think a big part of forgiveness is just can you understand why the other person did what they did? Like if you're
Right.
upset with somebody, do you get it? And like oftentimes like if it's something if it's like a way you've thought before, it's like it's really easy to forgive something when like you were that same kind of asshole before. Like you did that same you made the same mistake before because you get it. It's like
Yeah.
I can't how mad can you really be? Can you forgive yourself for having done that thing? And you
Right.
can forgive someone else if you can just get it. And I do think that like being able to like when the other person when you're having any sort of disagreement believes that you get what they're saying, it gets so much easier to resolve anything
Right.
if you
Yeah.
can really get their worldview in your head and act as though you do get it. It helps a
Right.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
um oh, I like there was a bit on how if that like through the sort of development that we've gone through where we've moved from this primal experience of like an interaction a relationship with the world to this new thing of the world being mechanistic and we're trying to figure out how to use it best. He brought up that like everything has lost its sacredness, that because we've started like we've started just looking at the world mechanistically and trying to figure out what makes it tick and like figure out what buttons to push to make what happen. Nothing feels sacred anymore at all.
Yeah.
And there was a section here on that I really liked and I wanted to read here. Is this the right part? One second.
Mm-hmm. Bro, I hate it when that happens.
Right.
I was doing that last
Dead
week.
air.
I was doing that last week, and it's like 3 seconds into trying to search for that passage,
Yeah.
my brain just shuts down.
You're
Just
thinking more
like,
about
I'm never going to find it. I'm such an idiot.
everyone's unsubscribing. All right. Yeah, this is it. Okay. The disenchanted cosmos impoverishes the collective psyche in the most global way, vitiating its spiritual and moral imagination. Oh, look at that. Vitiate, in quotes, not only in the sense of diminish and impair, but also in the sense of deform and debase. In such a context, everything can be appropriated. Nothing is immune. Majestic vistas of nature, great works of art, revered music, eloquent language, the beauty of the human body, distant lands and cultures, extraordinary moments of history, the arousal of deep human emotion, all becoming advertising tools to manipulate consumer response. For quite literally, in a disenchanted cosmos, nothing is sacred. The soul of the world has been extinguished. Ancient trees and forests can then be seen as nothing but potential lumber. Mountains, nothing but mineral deposits. Seashores and deserts are oil reserves. Lakes and rivers, engineering tools. Animals are perceived as harvestable commodities. Indigenous tribes as obstructing relics of an outmoded past. Children's minds as marketing targets. And that last part was like the one that hit me the most. Like when I read children's minds as marketing targets, that was like, oh, for me.
That's horrible.
It is so gross. It's so
That's
gross that
terrible.
we like that like adults have figured out how to play tricks on the brains of kids, and we're like all good with that.
Yeah.
We're all good with like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, you can like make up cartoon characters to sell poison to children.
Yeah, shoot your shot, dude. If you convince them, then
Right,
that's fair game. Yeah, just get them to eat your tricks and
right. If you convince that, like it's this it's so strange how we're like it's like okay if you manipulate people as long as you're just using words, as long as you're not physically pushing somebody. If
right,
it's not physical
right.
force, anything goes.
Yeah, they'll have like a superhero, and then it'll be like eat Cap'n Crunch Pop Tarts. Like, fuck, that's not gonna turn you into a superhero.
They make Pop Tart cereal now.
I just said Cap'n Crunch Pop Tarts as if it was the most ridiculous thing I could possibly say, and it turns out something like that
Yeah,
exists.
yeah, they're making whatever.
Pop Tart cereal. Yeah, yeah, whatever. Pop Tart cereal. Fuck
Make
it.
anything. And like just like songs, like people use songs to get into the heads of children to sell shit.
Yeah.
We don't. There's nothing. It's really gross that we do
Don't
that.
you wanna buy my Legos? Yeah, it's
I
terrible.
hate that.
And he was saying that that disenchantment with reality started with the Copernican revolution, which was the realization by the great physicist Copernicus that we were not, or astronomer, I suppose, that we were not the center of the universe. Now we know that the galaxy we live in isn't the center of the universe. Like we're a whole level above it now, but we
Right.
realized that the Earth was revolving around the sun, and all of the theologians at the time were waving this new idea off as just despicable heresy. And even Luther, who was the progressive, rebellious, radical theologian, said, how dare this ignorant scientist contradict the revelations of the Holy Spirit? It's like, holy fuck, dude.
Yeah.
And he said, did the prophet of the Bible not pray that the sun would stop in the sky, not that the earth would stop in the...
Yeah, I read that
Oh
over
my
and over because like
God.
I didn't even get what he was saying. Like it barely
Neither
made
did
sense.
he.
Like you're
Neither
saying
did he.
he said did not so and so say did not Joshua say that the sun would stand still, not the earth? Which like if he's saying that, then we would spin around it. Like
Right.
you're saying it's I don't even know what that
But that's
means.
how ridiculous fundamentalist Christians are right now, you know, refuting all sorts of things like evolution. That it's just like, yeah, life grows and develops. Yeah, life grows and develops. Yeah. No, not literally two human beings plopped on the planet 5,000 years
Right.
ago by a like, oh no, oh God, what are we?
Yeah,
It's so insane.
that's not working.
But that idea was so contradictory to the mainstream worldview. The idea that the sun wasn't revolving around the earth was revolving around the sun. It shattered the worldview so horribly that it disconnected us from the fact that the universe was even alive. It was so,
Right.
it was an idea that so far transcended what we thought was possible of the human mind. Like, how could the human mind figure out that the earth is revolving around the sun and the sun isn't revolving around the earth? How could we, I mean, if we could figure that out, we'd be gods.
Right.
We could never, you know? And that's how we look at like extrasensory perception now. No, if you could know what another person thought, then you'd be like Superman. It's
Right.
like, that's just, I mean, there's always going to be something
Yeah.
right on the horizon that transcends us so far that to achieve that, we go through this psychological death. We're just like, oh God, everything we thought was true was false, and we're gods, and we've conquered nature and reality. And it's like a 2-year-old that just like learned how to get into the cupboard and like thinks it can live on its own now.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
it's just so crazy. But he was saying that since that point, we became obsessed with thinking of the world as a dead place of objects to be understood and conquered,
Right.
and that we were the source of meaning and everything else was just crap from that point forward.
Right. Because the fact that we're no longer the middle makes us feel significantly less important because the world is
Right.
not literally built around us, which is what we literally thought happened, that the whole thing was just built around this rock. We didn't even know it was a rock. We thought it was a plane. We thought it was a firmament.
Right.
No, wait.
Right.
No, by that point we knew the Earth was round. Never mind. I shouldn't say that. We knew
Some
the
of
Earth
us
was
did.
true.
Some of us still do. Some of us are not sure.
Yeah, some of us are still saying firmament right
Yeah.
now. Yeah. I also loved that on like when he was telling the story of Luther that being like, oh no, none of this makes sense, and this whole crazy heliocentric thing going on, like they probably like called people heliocentrists the way we call people flat earthers and anti-vaxxers today,
Yeah.
heliocentrists. But that it was not just the church, it was like it was liberal scientists too that felt the same way, that felt like this is absurd. It said something like, if the earth were ever to move, mountains would fall, castles would crumble. It's like,
Right.
no, no,
Right.
that's not it.
Maybe look into it before you just.
Right. And I also it talked about like the fact that the Copernican revolution was far from when the first of us knew what was going on.
Right.
We
Tons of people already knew that. They
right,
just, actually, you guys, you know what? Never mind. Fuck me, right? I'll just keep it to
right.
myself.
We knew for thousands of years. We knew it was like 1,000 years before that.
Was it the
It was
Pythagoreans?
yeah,
They
the
were like a little
Pythagoreans
science
knew.
cult that just
Yeah,
knew things, and everybody was like, they're warlocks.
yeah. They were like math was their religion, something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
That's dope.
Yeah.
That's
Uh,
fire.
but they had known for a long time, and there's ancient Egyptian and ancient Mayan correlations with stars, and if they understood the movement of the stars to that degree, then it could be assumed that they knew we were going around the sun.
Right.
If they were able to like predict where things were going to be and like commemorate that Leo was here when we built the Sphinx, that like
Right.
they knew
They knew.
way back, they knew 15,000 years ago what was
Yeah.
going on. Copernican revolution was when we just decided, okay, let's move forward with this as an understanding. We
Right.
go around the sun.
Yeah, let's all adopt this. And then
Yeah.
everybody was like, at this point, dude, we're running shit. So the point of all this, because we've been beating to death this idea about the dead universe versus a living universe that we are a part of. Point of all of this is that to adopt an astrological worldview, first you have to understand that it's not that we are alive and that everything else is dead and random nonsense. It's that there are some creative and intelligent patterns that go through all things. And that basic philosophy makes it possible to understand that what happens here could correlate with what happens in the stars. Oh,
As
here
above,
it is.
so below.
Page
they say.
73. Yeah, as above, so below. Page 73, it summarizes that real quick. So let's hit that and then go into synchronicities.
Sure.
Astrology, in its most general definition, rests on a conception of the cosmos as a coherent embodiment of creative intelligence, purpose, and meaning, expressed through a constant, complex correspondence between astronomical patterns and human experience. This creative intelligence flows through all things. That's
Yeah.
the basic idea of astrology.
Yeah. Love
So,
that.
you had notes about synchronicities, right?
A little bit, not a lot, because
Okay.
like synchronicities, it's like mainly what this podcast is about. It feels like it comes up every single time.
True.
Like when you start looking into any sort of woo-woo thing, people start noticing synchronicities about stuff, and
Right.
it comes up. So yeah, I mean he talks a lot about Jung in this book, and it seems like Jung is a big inspiration to him. Do you say Jung or Young?
Everything. I say Jung, Young.
Okay, cool. All right,
Nobody
just keep
knows.
mixing it up then.
Yeah. No historians. No, nobody on the planet knows.
That's true.
Nobody knows, folks.
They don't even know what country he's from, which is crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which has led to
Historians
the
say
wide
he might have been
widespread.
Greek.
Yeah, or alien. That's what most people believe. That's what Jordan Peterson says. Just kidding. Okay, so he talks about Jung.
You're a simp for saying you were kidding.
Damn it. I was serious. But Jung was a big old synchronicity guy. It was his favorite thing in the world was synchronizing.
He's a psychopath, dude.
He's always talking about the universe and how it communicates with us through synchronicities. And there was a really cool story in here about Jung. You want to tell that?
You
And,
tell
like,
the
his-
beetle one, and I'll tell the clock one.
I don't know the clock one, so cool.
Then I chose wisely.
All right, so Jung has a patient. He has this woman that's been coming to him for a
And he
while.
is a psychotherapist, if anyone doesn't know that.
Yeah, he's a psychotherapist, and this woman's been coming to him for a long time, and she's very closed off to the notion of any sort of magic or any sort of meaning to anything going on. And he feels like he's at a bit of a standstill with her because they're not making any progress. They've been doing dream analysis, and she'll like tell him about her dreams and about what what happens in her dreams, and he'll try to do his dream thing and analyze like what this might mean or get her to analyze what it might mean, and she's not really into that at all. She doesn't think that it means much of anything. And she tells a story of a dream where a golden scarab beetle like shows up in her life. I can't remember the context of why it was there, but as she's telling this dream, behind him Jung hears a knocking on the window, and in the middle of her story, he just knows what's happening. He walks over to the window, he opens the door, and as soon as it flies in, he grabs a bug, and then he says, "Here's your scarab." And he shows her a greenish gold scarab, which was the closest thing within any range that would be able to represent what it was that she was dreaming about.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, he was able to actually make progress with her, and he felt like successfully psychotherapized her.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and it was because she saw this magical thing from her dream appear so confidently in his hand right in
Right.
front of her.
And he knew that it wasn't magical. There's just a consistent intelligence in the universe that sent that into the dream state and sent that into the room.
Right.
Same thing. For him, that was normal because it fit into his worldview.
Right.
But for her, it was so far outside of her worldview that she's like, I think I've got some things to learn
Right.
because I really can't.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with what just happened.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of goes to the idea, I'm sure this is from other things too, but I heard it in the movie Thor, the idea that magic is just science we don't get yet.
Yeah.
We can't explain it yet.
Yeah.
And so to him it's not magic because he understands that the universe is to some degree alive and communicates with us. And so that's not weird for him. But to her it's blowing her mind.
Right.
That's impossible.
All right, here's another story about Jung and synchronicities. Well, I'll just tell you. So somebody is talking to Jung about publishing a journal, and Jung doesn't like it. And he's saying, I don't think you should publish this, blah, blah, blah. Let's put this away. Something they had both worked on together, I think. And they had met at 5 o'clock, right? So Jung is sitting there talking to the dude and decides, no, we're not going to publish it. And the dude needs Jung's approval. Like, Jung's in charge of this shit. And Jung says, what time did we come in here? And the guy's like, we came in here at 5.
Mm-hmm.
And Jung's like, I had 5:05. What time is it? The guy's like, 5:30. And Jung's like, oh, I have 5:35. So they check another clock. And it turns out that Jung's watch is wrong and the other guy's watch is right. And so Jung says, well, it appears that you have the right time and I have the wrong one. Let's reconsider the journal. So the guy gives him his pitch again, and Jung rethinks it and decides to publish it.
Right.
Because he believed that the synchronicity meant that that he was wrong and the other guy was right. And one of the astrological principles in this book is whatever happens at a certain time in a certain place has the quality of that moment in time and that moment in space. And so the watch had the same quality that Jung had in that time in that place, that there was a certain quality to that, which was wrongness.
Right.
And then if
Okay,
the
yeah.
watch had the quality of wrongness and he was in the same time and place as the watch, he must also have had the quality of wrongness.
Right.
And should reconsider his decision.
I remember that now. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
It's dope. Yeah.
That's a pretty legitimate scientist thinking like that. Is very bizarre.
Yeah. There was more about Jung in that Jung was apparently also interested in astrology, which I had never heard of that. Have you heard that was something he was into?
No, I have read about Jung's perspective on astrology. He did a study whether there were significant correlations between Myers-Briggs personality types and sun signs in astrology, and he found that there weren't. And so,
Meaning like the Aries, Gemini, Taurus, those signs?
yeah,
Okay.
with
Personalities.
Myers-Briggs personalities,
Okay.
ENFJ, INTP, all that crap. So
Yeah.
he found that there wasn't a significant correlation. I read that and I was like, yeah, I read about it. Jung doesn't believe in astrology. And then read this book. Turns out in his later years, all
Right.
evening, every evening, he was obsessing over astrology. He was running natal charts on every client he saw.
Right.
It's like, whoa.
Which is fascinating that he was like, it kind of feels like he was secretly into it. Like he didn't want to be real public with it.
Right.
And the vibe I got from what he was saying is that it's like he was already so out there that he couldn't add, and also I'm into astrology.
He had to choose his battles.
Right.
Yeah, he's already pushing the collective unconscious thing and experimenting,
Synchronicities.
writing about UFOs and all
Yeah.
this. He's like, I can't be the astrology guy too. This
Right.
one, Peterson's probably in a similar place where he believes in
Probably.
all sorts of crazy things that he's like, I'm just going to teach a couple of things that people think are crazy.
Yeah.
Just going to do that. Leave the rest alone.
Yeah, I always say that I look forward to the day where Jordan Peterson's like, fuck it, I'm gonna say
Yeah.
everything I want to say, because there's probably more that he does not feel comfortable saying.
Right.
The same reason Jung couldn't say this about astrology.
Right.
He was into it.
It'll be when Peterson's old.
Yeah,
Yeah, when he's old, he's just going to start just saying shit.
I hope so. Hope so.
Yeah. And another interesting thing about Jung and astrology is that Jung and Freud were trying to work out the basic governing forces of the human psyche. What are the motivational, creative forces within our mind? Because it seems that our minds are contradictory and multifaceted. Like we have one instinct and another, and we can choose between them, and they
Mhm.
battle each other, and we're
Yeah.
not single-minded, you know? So Jung and Freud had worked out, I think mostly Jung, but it was Freud's work too, had worked out the archetypes that he believed flowed through being both on an individual and collective level.
Mhm.
And they were similar to the Greek gods and goddesses.
Right.
And then they also ended up being similar to the astrological archetypes, the personalities of the planets.
Right.
So that is all really interesting. There seems to be this series of governing forces, and as a Christian, I'm really interested in that because it seems like the Greeks were right about the fact that there are gods and there are governing forces that transcend us and rule over us, and we are slaves to them.
Mhm.
And then there's obviously some aspect of us that isn't a slave to them because we can even conceive that they exist, and we can choose between them. We can say yes or no to lust and anger.
Right.
But if we say yes to them, then we're not at the steering wheel anymore.
Right.
They are. And so that aspect of us that can call the shots and discern
Mhm.
seems to be the Christ archetype to me, the Christ in all of us. And
Interesting.
Jesus, the person, just represents that cell of the collective human body. But that cell also exists in each of us, that pure aspect of ourselves that can truly choose and love and act on free will and be creative and
so.
compassionate and kind and all those things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Archetypes are kind of hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, there's a pretty big section in here on archetypes, but it seems like it's hard to define in one specific way. Like, I can name examples of it. I get that beauty is one. I get that anger is one. I get that greed is one. That, like, they're just ideas that kind of permeate us. Can you explain it any better?
I can, a little bit.
Okay.
So, you can't describe them directly because they aren't describable. They're not objectively describable. They are subjectively experienceable, or whatever the proper word for that would be. So, imagine that you were trying to explain to a colorblind person the personalities and qualities of the colors. Of the color red, you could say
Yeah.
angry, violent, romantic, passionate, blood. You could say all those
Yeah.
things. It would sound kind of incoherent,
Right.
but you get it. And of blue, you could say cool, warm, relaxing, loving, embracing. And of green, you could say natural. And of brown, you could say mixed, earthy, grounding, core,
Yeah.
masculine. You know, of
Yeah.
purple, you could say sharp, feminine. So they can be described, they can be evoked, they can be experienced, but they can't be objectively categorized or defined.
Yeah.
So because they are creative, intelligent forces or gods or their personalities, so they can be experienced, they just can't be put in categories. And so they're expressed differently, you know, like it's just slightly different shade of red can be a totally different vibe.
Right.
You know, you can have a pretty, like, this red is kind of more like corporate and university. I'm pointing to something on the computer screen
Yeah.
for the one person who listens on SoundCloud. This is like a corporate WSU red. This is not passionate or violent or angry.
Right.
It's fairly neutral emotionally speaking.
Yeah.
But there's a red that's romantic. There's a red that's, so they're like that. And it seemed that the archaic mind could observe, I think it was 4 or 5 of the planets can be observed with the naked eye, and they would look to those planets and describe their personalities.
It's 7 if you count the moon and sun.
Love it.
Yeah.
And then, so people would look to them and try to describe their personalities and what they reminded them of, and they
Right.
ended up intuitively generating descriptions that did align with the personalities of people whose sun signs were aligned with this or that planet, and then
Right.
those also ended up lining up with what the Greeks had figured out about the mythological archetypes,
Right.
and what Freud and Jung had figured out about the series of forces that seem to collaboratively govern the human motivation. And so
Right.
they, they're more subjective like that. And so
Yeah.
this is a hard book for the scientific aspect of my mind to grasp,
Yeah. It's
And
really complicated.
And I wasn't really interested in the planet's personalities. I was interested in the philosophies of the astrological worldview, whether there's any scientific validity to the astrological worldview.
Mhm.
The personalities of the planets I can get later.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit down and memorize their personalities. Like, if I read the bios for you, Sarah, Evan, Juice, Sean, and Kalia,
Mhm.
read all of your bios, I wouldn't remember you. But if I hung out with all of you, I could describe your being, even though it'd be
Sure.
subjective and inconsistent.
Yeah.
So I just think, as I run natal charts on myself and people I love and superorganisms like nations, and then read about the planets through them and line them up with what I know about those people and those superorganisms, I can slowly start to intuit what those archetypes are that way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just reading, it's like Uranus is some kind of chaos and radical change and rebirth, and Neptune, some like, I don't remember until I
Ocean.
apply it.
Yeah. 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 And I also thought it was really interesting that like those same kind of archetypes that they associated with the planets, those same sorts of ideas had already manifested themselves in not only Greek but also Roman mythology and also probably in Nordic mythology and in Egyptian mythology.
Yeah.
To the point where like there was a close enough for the first 7 or for the first 5 planets, I suppose, there was enough of a correlation that they directly named the planets after the Roman gods. They're
Right.
still using Roman god names for them now. And I believe Uranus, Pluto, and what's the other one?
Neptune was.
Neptune. Yeah, they're all
Yeah.
Roman gods too.
Right.
Yeah. What were we saying? Where were we going?
I don't know. We talked about the archetypes. We can move on to something
Yeah.
else.
Archetypes.
We hit
are a thing.
synchronicities a little bit. The implication of synchronicities is that reality is alive, intelligent, and communicating with us.
Yep.
Oh, I wanted to touch on the definition of a god. You mentioned that a god is a force that outlives us. So, anger was around a lot longer
A
than
force
you.
that outlives us. I didn't catch that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
like a force that existed before and after us. Us being humanity as a whole. Like the force of anger and the force of lust are a universal constant. You can observe that in lions,
Right.
Lions are not fundamentally lustful or angry creatures,
Mhm.
but you can see them a week out of the year or whatever it is, lions are doing nothing but banging.
Right.
And then I don't know what their exact cycle is, but they
It's
operate
extreme,
like
though.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like once in a while they just bang 30 times a day.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time they're just chilling. And they're pretty cool, but a young gets attacked and they freak out and they get angry and violent and just turn into monsters. And you can see that in them. I have no idea about evolution and which animals came first and whatnot. But the point is that those forces can be observed in life in general, not just in people. And so they're a lot bigger than us. How big are they? Who's to say? But they're a lot bigger than us.
Right.
And that's a way to wrap our minds around what's rational about the Greek gods. It's like, yeah, lust existed before you, will exist after you, you being humanity, not just a human.
Mhm.
And if it's controlling you, you have no free will. You're doing what it tells you to do.
Yeah.
And if you gain mastery over it with discipline and ethic, then you're not a slave to it anymore. It's a god.
Right.
You're interacting with it. It's creative, intelligent, has an agenda.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, uh, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about like the charts themselves, or like natal charts.
Yeah, I didn't understand it at all, so I'm actually excited to hear. It sounds like you grasped that a lot more than I did.
I grasped a little bit, yeah. So when they do charts, and like I've gone online that same period where I ended up adding this book to my wish list. I'd been online. I went to some astrology website and put in my birthplace and time, and it showed me my chart. But you look at it, and it's like it's a circle with a horizontal line through it, and then there's a bunch of symbols around the outside of it. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, wow, I don't know what to do with any of this though.
Mm-hmm.
So reading it seemed just completely pointless at the time, but now I can kind of grasp a little bit of what's going on. So the way the natal chart works is you see a circle and there's a horizontal line through the middle of it. That horizontal line is like the horizon. You're at the middle of it. And so they people that make natal charts, they need to know the minute you were born, because the minute you were born affects the tilt of the earth, affects where the earth is at spinning wise, and so that's going to affect wildly where everything else is around the outside of the circle. So for example, there's 10 things that go around the outside of the circle, and those 10 symbols are for the sun, the moon, and the 8 other planets in our solar system, including Pluto in this case. Around the outside, the sun looks like a circle with a dot in it. That's the symbol for the sun.
Mm-hmm.
If the symbol is at the very top of the circle, it means you were born at noon. If it's at the very bottom of the circle, it means you were born at midnight. It spins clockwise around the outside of the circle. So if it's coming up from the left side of the horizon, then you would say that the sun is rising. And if it's
Okay.
going down towards the right side of the horizon, you would say that it's setting.
Okay.
Or there's another term they use for it, something like receding or proceeding, something like that. And then if it's on the bottom side of the horizon, it means that you couldn't see the sun at the time that it was going around the back.
Okay, gotcha.
So then everything else, the moon and the other 9 planets, or the other 8 planets, the point is just where were they in relation to the sky? If if you are the center point and straight up from you is straight up on the chart, then you define from there where every other planet was in relation to the Earth at the time. And so around the outside, that's what you'll see. I don't know all the symbols. The symbols are strange. I haven't learned them yet. But each different planet has a different symbol that goes around the outside of it. And I'm sure that for people that actually understand each of those archetypes that are associated with those planets, it means a lot more just looking at it by default to be like, oh, Uranus was rising at the time, and that means something, and Pluto
Mm-hmm.
was setting at the time, and that means something.
Mm-hmm.
So don't get all that essentially, but it did make me really excited that like, oh, I get what I'm looking at all. I get what the
Yeah.
structure of this is.
Yeah.
So it's gone into a little bit of like practical astrology at this point. And it gave a few examples of cycles that you can see with evidence that have happened in like famous people's lives.
Yeah.
Richard Tarnas, the author of this book, he mentions at one point that he, like most sane people, started from a place of skepticism about astrology. Because I think that is the default, and I mean, in my opinion, reasonable assumption to make about it. Like this whole like, oh, what's your sign? And like, are we compatible based on the sign? And what kind of person are you based on the sign? It sounds very goofy. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound plausible to somebody that hasn't looked into it at all. And it didn't
Yeah.
seem plausible to Richard Tarnas either.
Well, it does sound plausible to some people who haven't looked into it because they're thinking just on intuition. You know, their intuition
Mm,
just says, I like this. Where and when you were born has to do with the quality of your being
mhm.
and your chemistry with others. This intuitively feels right. But if you're thinking rationally, it's like, what on earth does that have to do with who I am as a person? What are you talking
I
about?
suppose so.
But
Yeah, it
that's
makes a
one of
kind
those
of sense.
examples of intuition being right, you know, and the
Yeah,
logic only being only following the intuition.
yeah. Uh, so Richard Tarnas, it seems like he had heard that Jung was kind of into it, and I think that was a big part of what pushed him towards it, because he seems to pretty clearly be a big fan of Jung's work. And what he did was he's able to get a lot of data as far as like famous people's lives about like where were they born and when, and he could then do a pretty good natal chart on tons of famous people that lived a long time ago. So he has the whole span of their life,
Yeah.
and we have advanced computer systems now that can go back 10,000 years and see exactly what did the sky look like 10,000 years ago at this exact minute, because we can just track based on how everything's moving, how that would work. And he found that there was that what compels him most about astrology, the stuff that he thinks is for sure real, is these sort of broad strokes, uh, natal chart. There's a term for it, like your natal chart compared to this moment right now. So like there, the big example that he talks about is the Uranus cycle.
Yeah.
That so Uranus takes 84 years to make an orbit around the sun. And I don't get the geometry is a little confusing for me as to how that would work with the natal chart. I don't totally get it, but apparently Uranus also moves around the natal chart in that same amount of time. It takes 84 years for it to get back to the original point.
Mm-hmm.
And around the halfway point, which is not always at 42 years old, it's somewhere between like 38 and 46 or something like that, because there is like a percentage sliver that like, so when if Uranus is starting at the top of your natal chart, about between like 38 and 46 years, it's going to reach the halfway point. It's going to reach the bottom point of the natal chart. And that seems to often lead to some sort of big moment of change in people's lives. And when he looks at famous people, he looks at people, I can't what's the Darwin, like
He did
Darwin was an
Darwin,
example.
Newton, Freud.
Lots of guys though, lots of people that he looked at.
Yeah.
And when their Uranus was within 1 or 2 degrees of directly across from where it started, which is not always exactly 42 years. So it's not like, well,
Because it
people just,
depends, because the real orbit is some sort of weird oval,
right.
and the chart is a circle, so it doesn't go
Yeah.
exactly.
We have two elliptical orbits, and they're not orbiting around us. So it's a little strange. It's a bit more complicated than just a circle. It gets there at exactly halfway. But in that period where their personal Uranus is across from where it started, they had big moments of change. They released big important things, like Darwin released his on the origin of species, and there was a
Wow.
lot of examples given like that. And those seem to be the things that Richard Tarnas is most compelled by in terms of like, okay, astrology is real, guys. It seems like he's not. He did say that like later on in the book we're going to get into some of the traditional 12 signs system, and that there is some stuff about that, but it doesn't seem like it's what he thinks is most important. And I think that
Right.
which is kind of, it sucks because that is when people talk about astrology, that's immediately where their head goes. People that just that have no interest in it and they just have kind of seen it casually in their lives, they're never thinking about birth charts. What they're seeing is you're a Gemini. This means look at the newspaper today. You're going to have a big business deal.
Yeah.
It's a goof. That's not what's happening.
Right.
Uh,
Because 1 in 12 people are not going to have a big business
we
deal
got a
today.
big business deal to do today. Make sure you're ready for your big business deal when it comes. So we're going to get into a little bit of that later, but apparently that's not the primarily compelling stuff about astrology. It's not like the really convincing stuff.
Yeah. It's just like Christianity, dude. When I really dove into like Jesus theology, it's like, oh man, what Christians have been emphasizing is not to me the most important thing that gets
Mhm.
at the core of this. Same thing with astrology. I look into it and I'm like, you know what? This is actually valid,
Right.
but I don't think what's been emphasized about it is really what I would emphasize about it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you got to look into shit for yourself.
Or wait for Richard to do it.
Yeah. Because other people might read this and go, well, I think the most important part of this is to categorize people based on personality types and understand how all those personality types interact. That's the part that matters. They
Mhm.
might say that. We're more macro thinkers,
Yeah.
but depends on what part interests you the most.
Sure. One thing I wanted to say about Tarnas in general, did you know much about him backstory wise about the guy?
No, but I have fantasized a lot about going to this university in California, CIIS, California for Integrated something something. They have crazy programs out there. They have a graduate program called East-West Psychology that brings together Eastern and Western religious and scientific ideas on the mind. They have a program called Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness that Richard Tarnas created and founded.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've read that whole program summary, man, 5 times probably, and just been like, dude, if I ever get hit by a car and win a lawsuit, I'm going here.
Yeah.
Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness. What are you talking about?
That's wild.
And so the intro to this book is that he founded that program. I was like, no fucking way. But it also made me feel even more like, God, we don't need to go to college. Read his book. You know,
it's true.
just buy the book.
There's books. Yeah. The one thing,
But what'd you find out about him?
the thing was that he had written a previous book, The Passion of the Western Mind.
Yeah.
And he talked a little bit about it seems like he had written that book as a precursor to this, that he felt like he needed to totally understand. He already had some interest before writing that first book, which, if I remember right, it took like 10 years to write the first book and like 15 to write this one.
It was 10 and 30.
10 and 30?
I think it was 30 for Passion of the Western Mind and 10 for this one. Maybe the other way
Jeez.
around. I don't remember, but
That's insane.
yeah.
But he wrote the first book because he felt like he needed to totally understand and be able to communicate, how do we get here? How do we get to this point where we now feel like a complete disconnect from the universe, and we have like gotten farther and farther away from any sort of spiritual meaning, and we are advancing while also feeling less and less connected to life. And so he wrote that whole first book just basically as a precursor to be able to talk about, okay, now how could we maybe, what's a synthesis? How could we maybe move forward from here? What do we need to understand to be able to move forward correctly?
Yeah.
And so
What a cool thinker and a hard worker.
Right? Like, to be so committed to an idea that you'd spend 40 years
Yeah.
working on it like this is
Einstein said
incredible.
he wasn't that smart. He just worked on one small problem. He just, every day, how can I zoom in on this one particular problem a little bit deeper? Just zoom into this one place, and then, you're going to know my name forever.
Yeah.
Because I nerded out on one thing my whole life.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking about that earlier today. I had a good idea about just some dumb little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, it's wild that I've never had that idea before, because I've played this video games a bunch of times, so it's amazing I've never thought of that. But then I was thinking, like, if I would just sit down and, like, just think about, if I would have, like, thought about this specific topic for a couple minutes, I would have just easily come to what's the best option here.
Right.
And I would have gotten to that. But instead, if you let your thoughts just kind of, as I often do, just let the thoughts kind of run in my brain and just let it think about whatever it wants to think about.
They just wander around.
Yeah, and sometimes it'll stumble on a good idea, but if you could actually the better you can aim your intellect at something, and just focus on, like, how do I approach this one situation? What's every possible way I could, and then cross off the ones that are worse, and you can get to the answer if you focus on it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Our
to hear
intellect
that
is like
Einstein
this
said that.
telescope or a microscope. You could think about it either way.
Yeah, both.
Just goes deeper and deeper and deeper into something.
Yeah.
And it takes such humility to do it. If you read Einstein's writing, so unpretentious, so approachable, down to earth guy, says everything as simply as he possibly can.
Yeah.
Unlike Nietzsche, he was just God. Every long word he could possibly come up with, so annoying. His
Very
ego. And you read Einstein, and it just sounds like you're just reading a regular guy expressing his thoughts.
Yeah.
It's like, it takes such humility to commit yourself to one idea. Because Nietzsche is like, all right, I'm really smart. God gave me some intellect. I'm going to use it to try to become the biggest and brightest philosopher. And he just spiraled off into a manic episode eventually.
Yeah.
And then Einstein, on the other hand, he's like, you know what? I'm going to use this intellect to just do something really small and simple and productive. Just one thing forever. Just my one little thing. Just be happy with my little corner of the universe, and did something memorable and was a really decent man as well.
Yeah.
Side note, Jung and Einstein were talking about synchronicities together. They were getting dinner together, this book said.
Yeah.
And discussing the implications of synchronicities in the field of physics. What does it mean that there's something creative and intelligent about being? And Einstein said that his goal was to understand the mind of God.
Right.
And maybe what he called the mind of God is what Jung would call the collective unconscious. You know,
Right.
they were both trying to work out these ideas. What is the whole thing that we're in? What is the universal mind, and how does it work? And what does it mean that we're embedded in it?
Hmm.
Jung was approaching that through the psyche and how it reflected the nature of being as such. And Einstein was trying to figure out the physical laws of the world because that would help him figure out how the whole mind worked. And they were kicking it.
That's really cool. And one of the things I had written down that we glossed over was in the early parts of the book when it was talking about like the scientific revolution and the birth of Western thought and then the Copernican revolution. It discussed how early science felt like a spiritual pursuit. The
Yeah.
men that were making these revelations, their their goal their goal was to better understand God. Their
Yeah.
goal was to better understand like how our relationship with the universe works.
Yeah.
And these like revelations that they had felt like revelations, felt
Right.
like things that were revealed to them, which I hadn't thought about it in this way, but is also very similar to like the American cosmic intelligent download idea
Mm-hmm.
of like people feeling like they're getting like when they have some sort of a technological advancement or some kind of a new idea, a lot of people even feel like they are getting it from something outside of them. And they probably are. Probably some people are getting it from something outside of them.
Mm-hmm.
There was a story in American Cosmic about a famous Indian mathematician who would always have these like brilliant new insights into math. I wish I could remember who he was.
Yeah, he said he got him
Shiva.
from Shiva.
He would
Yeah.
always say, "I got this idea from Shiva," and then he would say it and it would be right, and they would just kind of shrug off the fact that he said, "I got this from Shiva," and just take it. His ideas always work. He says he gets them from Shiva. He's a nut, but his ideas work. Like, so, and
Yeah.
we were talking to our dad last week, and I was saying that like I feel like through looking into spirituality and like and just like all these kind of topics that we've been talking about and we've been looking into, I feel closer to God. I feel closer to the truth of the universe
Mm-hmm.
through looking for it. Like
Yeah.
I'm looking for it,
Right.
and wouldn't you know, I seem to be getting closer to it, or I seem to feel like I'm getting closer to it at least,
Right.
because it's all kind of the same thing. Trying to understand the mind of God is trying to understand the world around you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Isaac Newton and I can't remember the other couple people that Tarnas listed were Christians, and they believed because like one of the fundamental ideas to the scientific method is that the universe is coherent and consistent enough that it's worthwhile to study and record what it does and assume that it's going to do those things again.
Hmm.
You know, if you think that it's random and aimless, then why would you write anything
Right.
down? Why? What makes you think the universe is going to do gravity tomorrow just because it did today?
Yeah.
There's something coherent about it.
Exactly.
That's not to imply a concept of God that a fundamentalist Christian would use to justify unscientific views. I'm not saying that, but we're fragmented right now in sort of this strange psychotic state as a country where, or as the Western world, I guess, where the religious people don't understand the value of science and the scientific people don't understand the value of the religious ideas and
Right.
practice. And it's like, oh God, you guys, your thing came from religion, and then oh God, guys, your religion gave birth to science. Oh,
Right.
you guys need to shake hands.
It's the same. We're talking about the same stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, I was trying to think of powerful ideas that everybody agrees on. Because I talk to a lot of people about religion, and I prefer to talk to non-religious people about religion. I prefer to talk to agnostics because they're like, I don't know, something, you know, and I can throw ideas out there and they can take them or leave it and we can have a conversation. But like,
Yeah.
really religious people, it's like, I could say something and they could agree with me, but for the wrong reasons, you know? I could say like, yeah, I think that Jesus embodied God. And they're like, yeah, amen, brother, the blood of the lamb. And I'm like, fuck, we don't agree. You just know that I said something that justifies your worldview. We
Right.
don't agree for the same reasons. We're not even having a conversation. You just like that I made the right noises
Yeah.
that someone told you to make. Like, damn it.
That was a
But
like, not a comment.
That was that was a like, not a comment. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's so. Where was I going with that? Oh, a couple ideas that nobody ever disagrees with me on.
Yeah, yeah.
The scientific process works.
Sure does, yeah.
Living the way that Jesus said to live is a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever disagrees with either of those things.
Right.
And yet, that's a religious idea. That's a scientific idea. It's like nobody disagrees with that ever. People deny global warming, deny vaccines, deny all sorts of things that the scientific community supports, but they don't disagree about the scientific method.
Right.
They disagree about the integrity and efficacy of people who claim to be practicing the scientific method.
Right. They disagree
And
that it's been playing out right. That this is the
yeah,
scientific
that they're
method.
doing it. Yeah, no, you're not doing it. You're just believing in something that was told to you for this money and this agenda
Yeah.
and blah 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 blah. People can't stand Christians because of the hypocrisy and the organized religion being more concerned about money and wanting things from people instead of wanting
Yeah.
goodness for people. But they don't. I've never told somebody like I think we should live the way that Jesus lived, and them just be like, no, I think he was an asshole.
Right.
Like just everybody fucks with that. We agree on so much fundamentally,
Yeah.
but we're just not talking, like when you have two family members that are similar to each other but don't speak.
Yeah.
It's just like, guys, can we?
Yeah. Very true. What else do I got here? Oh, I wrote down one other note. Skepticism is the chastity of intellect. That was something from the very beginning, the preface. That was like what he started with. And I loved that metaphor. He's saying that because I think about skepticism sometimes, and I don't like the praise that it gets. Like I feel like that happens a lot. If you would have asked me like 2 years ago, probably I would say that like I'm a skeptic. I would call myself that because I felt proud of the fact that I start from assuming that everything is not real unless you can really put some proof right in my face that it is real. If it's anything that at least not everybody else is accepting is real, I'm not on board until you super hardcore prove it to me.
Yeah.
And like there's like a magazine called Skeptic Magazine,
Yeah.
and there's people that are professional skeptics,
Right.
and I think that's gross because it's like you're just out to disprove everything possible and not out to look for
Clearly setting up a bias.
exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah, you're starting with your hand on one side of the scale
Yeah.
really hard, and
Yeah.
you're gonna have to have something really heavy to push me away from this.
Right.
Um, and he said skepticism is the chastity of intellect, as in chastity meaning abstaining from having sex.
Mm-hmm.
Chastity for its own sake is pointless. Chastity only has any value if you are saving it for something.
Right.
If you're saving it for a reason.
Okay.
And
Oh, nice. Yeah. That's
so
interesting.
he said, so like you have to have, if you're practicing chastity, then you also need to have in mind, like, how are you going to know when it's time to not be chaste anymore? Like, when do you cash in
Right.
from the abstinence that you've been going through?
Right.
And that if people just remain a skeptic all their life, then that's pointless. Like, because there are some things to believe in, and if you spend your whole life going nope, 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 it's like,
Yeah.
then
You're
what's
gonna
this
miss the whole
for?
game.
What are you being skeptical for if you can't actually discern when things are real?
Yeah.
And I think people fall too hard onto the skeptic side of things.
Yeah.
And that may be because I'm now on the other side and I start from like, well, I want to hear this out first.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, as far as I can tell, it points to the fragmented nature of our collective mind. Because if you look at like, I'll just say the U.S. Like, if you look at all the people, if you consider the U.S. to be one big superorganism mind with
Mhm.
one great collective psyche, there are obviously aspects of it that will believe anything that they hear, aspects of it that will not believe anything that they hear, aspects of it that are way too subjective and intuitive, and then aspects that are way too objective
yeah,
and rational, and it's fragmented, right? Just like, I mean, imagine that you were hanging out with a person, and on Tuesdays, she believed everything she heard, and on Wednesdays, she didn't believe anything that she heard, and on Thursdays, she disagreed with everything that you said, and on Fridays she agreed with everything that you said. She's like, this girl's mind is fragmented. She needs a psychiatrist. Like, this is a serious problem.
Mhm.
Like, that's how our collective minds look to me. Is like, we have people that just can only see that perspective, and we have people who can just only see this perspective. Like, we're
Right.
sick. We're sick. We need to go to the doctor.
So you're saying you see like these different points of like, over here this person is really on this side, and over here this person's really on this side. You're seeing that the same way as like a person who's wildly different at different times,
Yeah.
because we are all sort of connected in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're a great divided mind, but that's the way that that's because we're such a new collective mind. You know, we haven't been a 300 million person or 7 billion person hive mind for very long. The internet has all of a sudden connected us all. Now we can all argue, and so we
Yeah.
choose sides because we see, whoa, I mean, if you put the political spectrum on a two-dimensional line, and let's say it was 100 units wide, you could say, oh no, that person's at 74. That's a serious problem. I need to place myself at exactly 26.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
then the 26 justifies the 74, and they're both just as foolish as the other and just as right as the other, and they both justify the other because
Right.
each of them points out how extreme the other is, and the fact that the other side is so extreme justifies that person being so extreme, and the fact that they use that extremeness of the other person to justify their own extremeness means they're admitting that they know they and that other person are both extreme.
True.
And they know there's a center, and instead of everybody saying like, meet you at 50, you know, just
Right.
go, that person's at 1, I'm at 99, that motherfucker. It's like,
Right.
well, why'd you give your attention to the person at 1? Why didn't you just go hang out at 50? But I don't
Yeah.
think everything, but if everybody was at 50, then it would topple, because a structure that doesn't have a wide base will fall. And so there's also something about the stability of people radically disagreeing
Mhm.
and staying on. It's like it's easier to balance a teeter-totter if you're on opposite ends than if you stand right on the
Like that.
center, two people, you'll both
Yeah.
eat shit. So there's a necessity to the extreme polarity too. I don't want to say that's not the way
Right.
it should be. Like what at the beginning of Righteous Mind, there was a quote, can't remember who it's from, but he said, my goal is not to judge, not to hate, not to laugh, but to understand. Like
Right.
that's how we should see it. Like, I want to get why it works this way. So that's what I'm trying to do. But my point is, it points to the fact that people are so extreme on one end or the other points to the fact that we're a fragmented mind that needs some sort of healing and understanding. Not that we shouldn't be where we're at right now, because it's a journey.
Mhm.
But that's the direction in my mind that we're supposed to move, is for the skeptic to understand the naive, and the naive to understand the skeptic.
Yeah, I mean that's what we should be shooting for, and I'm sure that it's not totally realistic. Like, we probably don't ever reach a point where everybody understands each other, at least not alive. But yeah.
Seems like when people have interactions with extraterrestrials that are advanced beyond us, they're
Mhm.
having an interaction with an entire hive mind.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like they're
Yeah.
talking to one alien. It's like if you talk to a bee, you're talking to one bee. You
Right.
know, you're talking that one individual bee is a slave to the hive mind. It's not an individual will. The
Mhm.
way we are a collection of individual wills that punch each other in the nose. Like,
Right.
so I think we will move in that direction.
Hopefully.
As soon as the Neuralink makes us all one big
Oh
thing.
God. Maybe. Maybe.
That'll be the crutch that ushers in the cohesive collective consciousness.
Wouldn't that be beautiful? If we could all be one robot together.
Or it'll kill us.
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably both.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's decaying, everything's evolving.
Yeah. I love those sort of ideas of duality. Those ideas that like that two things can be right at the same time. And this book also made me think a lot about it made me think about free will and determinism, which is something that's been
Same here. I thought about it a lot reading this.
yeah, and that's something that has been on my mind like all my life, I feel like. The
Yeah, we've
notion-
talked about it forever.
Yeah. I remember I was thinking about this today that like
You
I
were
remember
100% determinism.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was very much like well, it's determinism. And if you can't see that, then you're retarded.
Right.
You're stupid. I mean,
Yeah. Don't say that word.
don't say stupid. Sorry. Sorry for all the stupid.
I was hanging out with Skyly this morning, our 3-year-old niece. I said stupid. She said, "Don't say that.
Did she
Don't
really?
say that. Don't say that."
Whoa. Where'd she get that from?
Defensive much? You think you're stupid, Skyly?
What was I saying? Oh, free will and determinism. I was thinking today, like, I used to get into like arguments at work at Amazon with friends of mine, with coworkers, where I would just be like so sure that determinism, like I would get into free will versus determinism arguments at work and be so certain that I was right and
Yeah.
come home like when someone didn't agree with me. I used to be so sure of that. But I'm feeling more and more like it's both. Like this story probably is already written. You and I probably this line is already scripted. We've already it's in effect, it's happening, and we can't really stop it because but we also have free will in that like we chose the story. Like we wrote the story ahead of time
Yeah.
and we're all both acting out the story and making all the choices that our character would make, but also the script already happened and like we are just acting it out. I think it can be both things.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of it being both things.
Yeah.
I'd like if that's the truth, that like that the truth is that I feel that I do have free will in practice because I'm making all the decisions that I'm making and nobody's forcing me to make any decision.
Mm-hmm.
But probably I made this decision already, or like I
Yeah.
signed up for this life, or I wrote
Mm-hmm.
this life before I lived it, or
Yeah.
something like that. I like the idea that it's both.
So, a couple of my new thoughts on free will and determinism after reading this. One is to think of determinism as the river and free will to be our ability to move about in that river as it flows. So if you imagine like that you went floating down the Columbia, right?
Mhm.
You really can't go backwards. Like you're not just going to turn around and just kick. You know,
Right.
you can for a second if you want, which would be like extreme sin.
Sure.
You can turn around and go backwards if you want for a second, not for very long,
Mhm.
because it'll destroy you, or in the swimming example, tire you out. The river's flowing. You can dance, you can do whatever dance moves you want while the river flows. You can say whatever you want while the river flows, you know,
Mm.
but it's going in that direction. And the river thing's been appearing, it's been a visual representation I've been conjuring up of this idea. And I've been more and more curious about reading the biography of Edgar Cayce, There Is a River.
Mhm.
Curious what that meant, that the book is called that.
Hmm.
I think it means something like that, that there's a flow to all things. But
Maybe.
another new thought I've been having is that it depends on the level of analysis that you're seeing it from, whether it's free will or determinism. Like, this is pretty much what you said, but
Mhm.
from our perspective right now, it's free will.
From me as a human,
it's free
it's free
will.
will.
But if you left the perspective of linear time and looked at the whole picture,
Yeah.
you would see that it's determinism. But that's
Yeah.
just because you don't exist in linear time, so you see the whole thing. It's
Mhm.
like the difference between watching someone make a puzzle and seeing the puzzle when it's done.
Mhm.
When you look at the puzzle, you don't watch the puzzle get made. You just see the puzzle made.
Yeah.
So that's like the determinism part. The free will part is us acting it out right now. But I've also come to believe that there are psychological forces governing us that are extremely suggestive. That
Like archetypes.
kind of. They I don't think so, but it might be. Jonathan Haidt talks about how your intuition is like an elephant, and your free will, or sorry, your rationality is like the person riding that elephant, and so that the
Right.
elephant is like the determinism, and the rider is like the free will, or the elephant is like the river, and the rider is like the person floating the river. There are things that are happening because you determined already before you lived this life that they were going to happen that way.
Mhm.
The New Age spiritual way I would describe that is that we have a spirit family and we talk amongst ourselves before we live a lifetime and decide about what we're going to do.
Right.
But there's a lot of details that we change on the way. The more scientific way I would describe that is that everything that your ancestors did before you contributed to how you act in the same way that a salmon is born knowing to swim upstream
Mhm.
and breed and all that. And so your instincts guide you, but you act with free will in the midst of those instincts.
Okay.
Or if you're a new age cat, I would say you and your spirit family decided before this what you were going to do,
Mhm.
like a movie with a plot written that's improv as it's filmed.
Right. Yeah,
So,
there's important story points that need to be met, but within that you have room to
right.
improvise and do whatever you want dialogue wise.
That's pretty much what the astrological worldview is saying. Around the age of 42, it's likely that you're going to have revelations and chaos and this and that.
Mm.
Um, my
But how that manifests would depend on some other improvisational decisions you're going to have to make in between.
Right, exactly. My spiritual awakening and break and all that stuff happened like 23, not 21,
Mhm.
but it's pretty close. You know, that was the point where my whole perspective radically shifted.
Right. That was like the Saturn cycle was something like I believe Saturn takes 26 or 27 years to go around. So or no, it was less. I think it was a little it was an amount of time that made it to where like in between 18 and 22 you would have like a really big moment of change or something like that.
Oh, well, I was talking about Uranus
Oh,
because,
really?
yeah, because he was saying that at 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 360 degrees of the
Right.
Uranus cycle, you would go through some chaotic change.
Right.
And I was thinking, what was that for me? Well, it wasn't 21, but it was 23.
Yeah.
It seemed like my psyche was involuntarily invaded by inspiration,
Mhm.
and all I could do was survive the process.
Right.
That's the experience that I had. I'm not saying that's an objective description of what happened, but I'm saying that's subjectively what I experienced. All
Yeah.
of a sudden, I was invaded with downloads, inspiration, just all this shit, and all I could do was just try to pick up the pieces and put it together into something that I could use.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not like I went seeking some great truth and found it. It was just all of a sudden, at a certain point, the universe just went bang,
Right.
and I just ate shit. It's like,
Wild.
it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. Why does that happen at that time? I decided beforehand. That's just how the flow of things works. That's the cycle we go through.
Right.
Spring comes, fall comes, winter comes, summer comes, psychotic breaks come. That's just how it goes. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's weird.
It might be. That seems to be the suggestion here.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything else specific I want to talk about. You got anything? Oh, you
No.
can tell the wise men story.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. So, in the Bible, it says that the wise men followed, what was it, the Star of Bethlehem
Yeah.
to find the Savior. And I saw a Catholic spiritual director for a brief period of time who said that there were rumors about the wise men being Tibetan monks. I haven't looked into that personally, but I was thinking, was this something Tarnas mentioned, or was
I
this
believe it's
something?
I believe it's in the book. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just because you sent it to me. I ended up reading it, but I'm pretty sure it was in the
I
book.
can't remember. I went down an internet rabbit hole about
Okay.
correlations between astrology and biblical theology, and something Tarnas said in this book sent me into that rabbit hole, but I
Uh-huh.
read some things that weren't from Cosmos and Psyche.
Okay.
One of the things I stumbled into, whether it was the internet rabbit hole or Tarnas, was that the wise men following a star to find the Savior could have actually meant that a small group of astrologers understood the time and place at which an extremely significant messianic figure was going to be born
Mm-hmm.
so precisely that they were able to go to that place and witness the birth. Um, and then Jesus had a quote about the fact that the seasons and stars move in cycles. I don't remember the exact quote. Let's look it up real quick because that's pretty. Do you have internet on your phone?
Ish.
Yeah.
Ish.
Try looking it up. Jesus.
Try looking in the index at the back for Jesus.
Oh, good idea. Yeah, because I turned my phone off when we started recording, but there was also rumors that Daniel, a great prophet and dream interpreter from the Old Testament, was an astrologer. And I think he learned it from the Pythagoreans or something.
Oh wow, there's people have the birth charts for Jesus. Of course they do.
What was his sun sign? Oh, Jesus doesn't come up until page 233, and we're only on page 140. We didn't mention this, but we're doing this book in 3 sections. So this is the first third of the book.
This says one proposal identifies the Star of Bethlehem with a potential conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, all in the same place at once, so aligned, occurring in 7 BCE, and that may have been when specifically Jesus was born. I don't know how specific we know the date of his birth. Do we?
I don't know. I do not know that
Anyway,
fact.
I can't find a specific thing, but
yeah. Well, maybe we'll bring it up on the next one if we remember. Jesus said something about the stars and seasons. One other thing. There was a Christian pastor who did a deep dive on the astrological event of Jesus' birth and became convinced that Jesus didn't even literally exist. It was all a metaphor about a great astrological event that occurred. I haven't looked into that book, but it made me think that there was a significant moment on the astrology clock, with Jesus being born, and it was so significant that this guy couldn't marry that perspective with the perspective that there was an actual historical figure, and he this Christian pastor decided that the whole historical Jesus was made up, and that it was all just this great astrological event that occurred. I'm like, I wonder if it was both.
That's
This
a tough pill to
guy,
swallow, but it could
this
be
guy
both.
went a little deep.
Yeah.
But because the evidence that the guy existed is just like, you just don't believe in history if you don't think that there was really a guy.
Right.
And so it's silly, but I'd be curious to read that book and see what exactly the astrological event was. And
Sure.
hopefully I wouldn't also be convinced
That would suck.
that history doesn't exist.
But if that's what it is, then that's what it is, I guess.
Dude, if that's the truth, I'll go there. I'll go wherever.
Right.
Whatever, dude.
Well,
yeah, we're good though. That was everything I was interested in. So
cool.
that's the first 3 sections of the book.
There's 8.
Yeah.
So we'll do 2 or 3 more for the next week. So the next 2 podcasts will be about this same book.
Yep.
Unless we have someone else on or something, which we might.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Night school.
Nice, cool.